This is what's great about sports. This is what the greatest thing about sports is. You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out. Because it matters.
Any coach, player, or fan will tell you that while they may enjoy the rhythm of their chosen sport, the camaraderie that it provides them, or some other poetic pinnacle, the thing that they enjoy the most is winning. The purpose of any game's existence is to entertain, sure, but the goal is to win. It is that goal, the desire to win, that drives our entertainment and love of sports. For coaches, it is the validation of their planning and their choices. For players, it is the payoff for hours of blood and sweat to become just that little bit better than their opponent. And for fans, it is the culmination of excitement and drama that is a single game or a season. All too often, however, teams decide to go against this basic tenet of sport and lose on purpose. Why do they do this? What can be done to stop it? And does it even really work? This is what you don't know about tanking. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Matt, and this is Blake.
Hello.
And today we want to discuss one of the most highly contested sports topics today, and that is tanking. And for the first time, not in forever, just ever, for the first time, we will have a 2-part episode for you. We're all grown up podcasters now.
Big boys.
Yes, sir. We're at the big boy table. We can do 2-parters too. And so you're going to be listening to this in the first batch that we drop. And hopefully it'll interest you enough to listen again in a couple of weeks when we finish the story for you. But yeah, we're doing tanking.
Tanking.
How do you feel about tanking there, sir?
So I can say that before starting to research it, I was skeptical about it working. You always hear tanking in a negative way, right? And of course, tanking is designed to get you better things.
Yeah.
But you always hear like, oh, they're tanking, like that's a negative thing. But this may have changed my mind a little.
So you've gone maybe the other way.
Not fully,
but
it's opened my eyes to more than just winning championships.
Right. Gotcha. And we kind of landed on this topic because I have a love-hate relationship, not with the teams that I follow, but the other people who follow those teams. So sometimes it gets crazy. I'm a Charlotte Hornets fan, unfortunately. It just is what it is. And currently the fans of that team are in full let's blow it up mode and get some like low picks and just make things happen.
Not the first time this has happened with this fan base.
Yes, and not the first time they've tried it, and we're gonna get there. But yeah, so I'm kind of iffy on tanking, and so yeah, this will be a fun conversation.
Good discussions.
All right, so we're gonna define first what tanking is, and so really we're gonna tell you what we don't think tanking is in the first place, just kind of what it's not.
Yeah, what doesn't qualify as tanking? What does not qualify as tanking?
Right. So I don't think that a team that's cutting payroll for financial reasons would be considered tanking, because they're not doing that to get better in the future. They're doing that because the owner's, terrible.
Yeah, that I think it's more of a bad business decision
Yeah.
than, hey, we need to get rid of things to get better things.
Yeah.
It's less of, yeah.
So the prime example of this is the Florida Marlins twice because they can't have nice things. Right, the '97 team was filled with all of these stars. It had Al Leiter when he was still good. It had shout out. He's a Yankees commentator. It's fine. Al Leiter was on that team. Gary Sheffield was on that
Gary
team.
Sheffield.
Several other just high profile star, high price players were on the team. Bobby Bonilla. Shout out to Bobby Bonilla Day every
I was
July
about to
1st.
say.
And then in 1998, the owners wanted to sell the team, so he just gets rid of everybody he can for whatever he can get for them to save money on payroll. And then the 2003 Florida Marlins, less star-studded, more surprise, like young players, they are ready to play. But then they go all in to win a championship at the deadline, and then they get rid of everybody in '04. Again, fire sale part two. But
And why is that not tanking?
so that wouldn't be tanking, I think, because in a lot of those cases, they weren't getting prospects that were going to be any good. I think some of the guys from the '97 fire sale may have led to the guys that get in '03, but the goal there is not to get picks. The goals there was not to get better players. It was just to relieve payroll.
Yeah, they weren't doing it to get better.
Yeah, at all.
They were simply doing it to spend less money.
Yes. If I have a god awful team, I will get this many people in my park, and so I want to pay that much money for players. And that's really a baseball thing more than it is in the other sports because there's no salary floor. There's no salary cap. There's nothing governing salaries.
No
really.
money. Yeah, no money rules really.
So that's a thing in baseball where they just can do this. The Astros did it too. I think that's later in one of these episodes, but they did it too. The Astros intentionally were bad with intentionally low payrolls while they ramped up for what they are now, which is cheaters. You got to throw that in. You can't.
I mean, they got caught.
And so did the Red Sox. It's fun. Anyway, a clearly non-playoff team that trades assets at the deadline also I don't think is tanking.
Under some circumstances.
Under some circumstances. This is the typical trade deadline. Like, I'm a buyer, I'm a seller, I'm all in to try to win right now. Yeah, let's make a deal. There's examples for this in all sports. The Yankees traded Aroldis Chapman a few years ago to the Cubs. The year the Yankees were not going to make the playoffs. They trade him to the Cubs. They get Gleyber Torres in return, and he is on the verge of breaking out. And everybody knew he was a good prospect, so it's a win-win. The Cubs get their title. They get a guy that can help them win that title. The Yankees get a guy that helps them for the future.
And then the Yankees sign Chapman the next season, right?
So it works out. Sometimes
they got him right. They got him right back.
So they get the best of both worlds
because they're stacked. Mm-hmm. But that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I believe they also traded Andrew Miller that season, a left-handed reliever, and so they didn't get him back, but they got players Chapman that helped him back in return. The Herschel Walker trade. Some of the older fans out there know about this one. The Cowboys had Herschel Walker, fantastic running back. Traded him to the Vikings because the Vikings were just sure that all they needed was a running back to win a Super Bowl.
Womp womp.
Oopsie. And then in return, the Cowboys got a load of picks. I think sometimes it gets misreported. I thought it was the full complement of Aikman and Smith and Irving and everybody else came as a part of that. But it did get them Emmitt Smith and Charles Woodson and a couple of other players that were instrumental in that. And so it didn't work out for the Vikings, but the intent still was they were going to win a Super Bowl. Cowboys were going to get things that helped them, and they did end up winning.
But Emmitt Smith wasn't a top 10 pick,
no,
right?
17th.
He was 17.
Yeah, 17.
So even getting a mid first round pick out of this turned out to be great. I mean, they weren't doing it to get a number one pick because who knows who they would have taken in that draft if they had gotten a number one pick. So they got a mid first round draft pick and turned it into something.
That's foreshadowing, people. Keep that in your mind. And then also in the NBA recently, we get Victor Oladipo being traded for Paul George. Oladipo had bounced around a couple of different teams. And then when the Thunder was on the verge of being blown up because their big three had Not all parted ways yet, but two of them had. It was just Westbrook hanging out there. Oladipo was traded for George to get Westbrook a kind of a sidekick.
Compliment, yeah.
And this worked out. The Thunder played pretty well the 2 years that Paul George was there, and Victor Oladipo made an All-NBA team for the Pacers. So what on the surface looked like the Pacers trading away their best player.
They got an all-star in return.
Right. And so that's not tanking, because that's the way in our minds that type of trade is supposed to work. I give you something that helps you now. You give me something that clearly is an asset that will help me in the future. And I'm just going to try to do the best I can in the process.
It happens all the time, too, with just different positional players.
Sure.
Like, I need a left fielder. You need a starting pitcher.
We've got an abundance of one or the other.
Yeah, you've got, like, both teams have an abundance of one or the other. And it just simply helps both teams to make that trade. That's not tanking.
No.
Because they're acquiring an asset that they need because they have more of one thing than they need, so they get something else in return for the other.
Okay, so that's fine. And then the last thing that we don't consider tanking is just general poor decision making. This is the teams that when you think of a bad team in whatever sport you're a fan of, the team that comes to the forefront, right? The easy dunk is that this is the Cleveland Browns.
Haslams. Poor souls.
Yeah, that's just sad. Maybe they are. Maybe they did tank in a couple of years, but like the long-term failure is not you tanking.
Like a decade plus of just bad decisions, just bad sales, bad drafts, bad trades, just all around not good.
Yes,
they're just not good.
You know,
they weren't good. I shouldn't say that they're not good, because they've made a few good picks recently. They're at least playoff contenders with Baker, Mayfield, and Myles Garrett. Right. But is that enough? So if they did tank, they never admitted to it, I don't think.
I don't think so.
If they did tank to get those, they still might only be a mediocre team.
Right.
But I don't think the majority of what has happened in Cleveland in the last 15 years was straight up, we're going to lose on purpose.
Right. It was like just trying, because there's been several years where it's like the Browns are the team to look for, and it's like,
and then they just don't.
They're not.
They're just 7-9.
Yeah.
Just all the time.
It is what it is. Here in North Carolina, we're not immune to this.
North Carolina professional sports are going through a rough time.
Yeah. The Carolina Hurricanes, who have now made the playoffs 2 years in a row.
Shout out Rod.
This recording. Yeah. Rod Brindamore. I want to look like him when I'm 50. I want to look like him now.
I say I would suffice to look like that today, but I don't.
But they went on a run nearly a decade where they didn't make the playoffs, and they were honest to God trying.
From 06. So I don't remember. They won in 06.
Won in 06.
What happened after that?
They won in 06. They missed the playoffs in 07, and then also in 08 they had a conference finals run in 09, and then that would be the last time they would be heard from until last year. And it was the Browns' situation. It was always they had players that could get it done, you would think, or players that could evolve to get it done.
Jeff Skinner,
useless. A lot of like promising situations, and it didn't work out. The Seattle Mariners out west in baseball,
they had Ichiro Suzuki for
a lot of their
years.
A lot of their non-playoff seasons they had Ichiro there. Felix Hernandez was there,
great pitcher,
and they just couldn't turn it into wins for whatever reason. Coming back to North Carolina, the Hornets, perpetually bad. But never bad, just kind of like middle.
Yeah, never the worst until
one time.
Until they did it on purpose.
Yes, and then they were the worst, and by worst I mean the worst. Team in NBA history in a shortened season.
Well, that was the Bobcats.
But that
was the Bobcats, not the Hornets.
The name we shall never speak of. and you know the other teams that are like this, right? The Buffalo Bills until this last year.
Forever.
Yeah, the Sacramento Kings. Always are rebuilding, always on the verge, always ready to go.
Always building,
Just never.
The Saints, brown bags over their heads.
Yep, that was terrible.
The old Bengals teams you were mentioning.
Yeah, the old Bengals teams were always pretty bad.
Well, they're still fairly. I mean, they've had Andy Dalton for 10 years.
And still off and on. Yeah, just for some reason,
still only average at best.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna say something about the Carolina Panthers here because I'm not a fan of them, but It's up and down. Sometimes franchises are just mediocre. That particular team has had big wins, but also big losses, and has never made the playoffs they have made the playoffs in consecutive seasons. They've never had a winning season.
Yeah, winning
in
record.
consecutive seasons, and so sometimes you just can't get out of your own way, or you can't put the pieces together for any real long-term success, and that's not tanking.
Right.
But it will come up again later in the episode. So all these things are not what we consider tanking. So why do teams do it, right? What's left about bad teams are the ones who intentionally sit players at the end of the season. They say guys are hurt and tell them to go take a break.
Mm-hmm.
They put together a roster of players
on purpose
who are not professional level quality guys, and they may be guys that can fit on a team somewhere. They could be a roster full of guys who are rotational players in the NBA, or guys that would fill out your bench in baseball or some other sports, but they're not guys. Nobody on your team is a starter quality,
right?
And you're putting them out there every night to lose.
Yep.
That's tanking.
Yes.
And so we need to answer the next question. Why on earth would you do this?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, what you got?
So guess what, guys? The current systems in place in American professional sports reward you for being bad.
That's it.
Is that groundbreaking information?
That is not groundbreaking information.
Okay, we're all on the same page there.
Yes.
Okay. Losing
yes.
is supposed to make you better.
Yes.
The leagues, in theory, are supposed to reward the worst teams for parity reasons, essentially.
Yeah, I mean the idea is that like any other competitive endeavor, everybody's going into it to be competitive.
You're supposed to try and win.
Everybody's trying to win, and so logically, at the end of the year, the worst team needs the most help. The best player. The teams at the top need less help. They've got good players, and the teams in the middle, theoretically, just need a little bump.
Maybe like in the NBA, if you're a mediocre team, you're like the 8th seed. In the playoffs every year. One great player, could put you in contention for years, right? So that's what we're talking about. Is that middle of the road team might only need one great player, but like you said, the great teams don't need much because they just won.
Yeah,
like the last pick without any other contingencies in the draft. The best team gets the last pick in the first round.
Right.
With all the lottery stuff, there's been a lot of lottery changes in the NBA specifically over the years. They've tried to reform it 5 or 6 times.
Yes,
in the last 40 years, trying to make people not tank.
Yeah,
they're trying to say, because originally there wasn't a lottery, correct?
Yes. So at different times, the NBA in particular had no lottery, and then it was like a coin flip between the worst team in the East, worst team in the West. Then we got the lottery that like just picked out the number 1 pick, which is where I think like the New York Knicks Patrick Ewing conspiracy comes from, like frozen envelopes and things, craziness. And then we've evolved now to like the ping pong ball situation.
Ping pongs.
To pop out the top 4 picks is where we are now, and then everything else is reverse order of record.
And at some point in this tanking overhaul process, the NBA decided to make the worst 4 teams have the same chance of getting the number 1 pick.
So there's less incentive to be the worst team.
But bottom 4,
you still want to be.
So in that case, I would say you don't have to overtly be the worst. You could put your best squad on the floor and be the 4th worst team in the NBA.
Yeah, there's teams that do that plenty.
So they don't have. I mean that they may not have come out and said, "Hey, our best option is to lose." They didn't have to try and lose.
Right.
They didn't have to do it on purpose.
But it doesn't fix the problem, because even if you're the 6th worst team, you have an incentive to lose
just a
few more games to be in that 4th. And then it's a race to the bottom, right? Because then the teams you're racing with have an incentive to lose just a few more games too, and eventually you end up in the same problem where everybody's now tanking collectively, and you end up you could make it worse. Because the 7th worst team in a league is not probably going to reach the depths of the actual worst team. But the further you bring that threshold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 picks, 6 picks, all having the same chances, you bring more teams into contention for
That's true.
that lower thing. So you could create a race to the bottom because in real world we all are like we're just trained to find loopholes and things, which is where tanking comes from, right?
Sure.
But the reason we have this set up in the first place is what you said. It's parity.
Mm-hmm. More parity brings interest in the sport and the teams individually. And then, of course, the interest brings money.
That's right.
Fans watching, fans buying tickets, fans buying apparel. Those sorts of things are why teams do this.
And it makes sense because in every league outside of baseball, there's some kind of revenue sharing involved, and then the salary caps of those leagues are based on the amount of revenue brought in too. So it helps the players. The players have an incentive to put on a good product because they will make more money in return. And that's the theory. Theoretically, this works.
Yeah, that's perfect case scenario if it works the way it's designed to.
But we've already mentioned that it doesn't work because we are trained to find loopholes and to get any edge that we can. And in this case, it's by being bad. So the real world application is that being great is a good thing. That being bad is a good thing.
Because you're rewarded.
But just being good is actually a bad thing with the way it's set up. If you're terrible, you're getting what you hope is a good player that's going to help you sell tickets. If you're great, you have good players that are going to help you sell tickets and make your fans happy and all that stuff. If you're in the middle, if you're the 6th, 7th, or 8th best team in the conference in an NBA season, your reward is a playoff appearance. In a normal season, you're talking about the 8th place team is 500, slightly below, slightly better.
Yeah, barely around 500. To put in perspective, 80 out of 82 games, they might win 60.
Yeah, the best teams normally are in the 60s, sometimes the high 60s. And so they get stomped with rare exception.
Because that's a 20 win
difference.
Swing.
Yes, huge difference. I mean, huge difference. And it doesn't work out. So your reward is to make the playoffs. You get to see your team on a national televised game. You get to pay 75% to double the price that you normally would pay to go watch a game. And it's exciting, it's fun, but in reality, you're mediocre still.
You still don't win any. Like making the playoffs versus not making the playoffs. What do you win?
Right.
You could go to the playoffs and get swept.
Yes.
I mean, that's very likely in an 8 versus 1 NBA series.
That's right. And so we have this mindset even as fans, probably as players, definitely as the general manager and the owner of the team, that being a first round loser is not helpful at all.
What do you? I mean, you might get a little bit more money.
Yeah.
You might get a little bit of exposure. You're getting some national exposure. Maybe you make a nationally televised game more than you would have, obviously, if you weren't in the playoffs at all. But definitely get something out of it. But is it worth being just good?
Right.
Or would you get more by being worse?
And I think, just from a fan's perspective, I think it depends on where you are, right? Like, I think Hornets fans have been for example, 8 seed that gets stopped. They've been a 6 seed that almost wins a first round series. And so from that perspective, it's like, is there ever going to be a chance where the team makes the second round? And then is there a chance that the team makes the conference finals? Is there a chance? If there's not, well, let's tank and start over. Because that part's fun, the growing and the seeing what can happen.
Well, you get a lot of exposure when you get a high draft pick. You get a lot of exposure when you draft a LeBron James.
Yeah, or Zion Williamson.
Or a Zion, because that's just the greatest thing since sliced bread at the moment.
Right.
And then, of course, next year, the next guy's going to be better.
Yeah.
Tanking can turn into a revolving door.
Right.
Because who knows? You could think you know who the best player in the draft is. Do you really?
No, you don't at all. And so, that's the deal there. If you're a team that's mediocre and you're not sure your collective core is good enough to get better, to achieve, to move forward, to get out of this patch you're in, if you're not sure that you're a free agent destination for some of the top free agents or even some of the guys that you can fit in, and if you're not sure you can get better that way, then all the incentive in the world is currently on blow it up and tank.
Get worse.
Just get bad and start over. And so that's why teams do it, because being the 8 seed is fun if it's the first time you've been there for a while.
Right.
But
just making the playoffs after not making the playoffs for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's an exciting thing.
Huge.
So that's the best thing that's happened to the franchise in a decade.
Yeah.
You're going to take that.
Yes.
And you might be okay with that. Right?
Yeah.
But then, say the first time you make the playoffs in 10 years, you go to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Like the Hurricanes.
What? And that is a promising thing. Like,
yes.
You are looking forward to next season.
Yes.
Because of what the team has done for you as a fan and what the team is doing competitively.
Yeah. But now you set an expectation. So when the next year you don't get there, then you start raising questions and you start whining a little bit and you start asking, like, why can't we do this every year?
It's not time to blow it up, people.
That's right. So that doesn't necessarily mean that, but fans jump onto it, right? Well, this is our ceiling. Let's start over. They're incentivized to believe that. So that's why we do it. And so now we're going to talk about what harm does this cause? What's wrong with it, right? Because on the surface, again, this is a way to get better players. Better players eventually makes things better for your team. And so from an individual perspective, it's maybe fine. But what kind of harm might it cause? Number one is quite simply, it is a worse product for everybody involved.
Everyone.
It does not just hurt your team if your team tanks, because everybody knows you're tanking. As a fan of that team, there's no point. Like, I'm not interested in watching a team that's tanking. I don't need to watch the guy that we're expecting to be a good player in 3 years. I don't need to see that player grow. I can watch highlights. I can look at Twitter and get like discussion of how much better this player is getting. I don't need to see the bottom of the trough.
Well, when you have one great player on a team, like a Kemba,
yeah,
right? Say you have a Kemba Walker on the Charlotte Hornets, and they tanked to get him,
right?
And they got him with the 9th.
Yeah, it was kind of a higher pick.
9th.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was a lottery pick.
Yeah. And then intentionally were bad that next year in an attempt to get Anthony Davis to play with him.
That didn't work out.
No.
But so when a team is going to lose, part of that thing you get as a fan of sports, right, is the thrill of your team winning.
Yeah.
Watching your team win. That's like the greatest feeling in the world. I remember as a Carolina fan, we were at my mom's house, and I was holding my oldest daughter. She was a baby, and I can't remember the specifics of the game right off the top of my head. But Carolina hit a late shot. I was holding a baby, like a sleeping baby, and I jumped out of the chair and screamed. I made her cry for a long time, but it's that feeling. It's like that euphoria, that rush that you get seeing the team that you're passionate about win a game, hit a shot, score a goal, make a stop, whatever it is. That's what you go for. So if you know that the coach isn't putting the best quality on the field, on the court, on the ice, whatever, there's no point in watching. What do you get out of that as a fan?
Exactly. Like, there's no point. And as the fan of the team that the tanking team is playing, right? If we're calling the tanking team Team A, the fans of Team B that are going into that game also know one of two things. I'm going to watch the team I like just completely destroy this team. The outcome is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to sit here for 2.5, 3 hours, depending on the sport, and I'm going to watch my favorite team fall to pieces and lose to this terrible team.
Which is even worse.
Which isn't fun at all either.
No.
And so you know that no matter what happens, this will not be enjoyable.
The product just isn't good.
And you don't watch. And like we said earlier, that affects everybody because now there's less money of people going to games. It may affect the price of tickets for the teams that are playing the team that's tanking.
Yep.
And it affects TV ratings. And so your TV revenue on the next contract may not be what it is. We know that they always continuously go up and up and up, but maybe it's not as high as it should be. So it's a worse product, which defeats the entire purpose of what
competition.
what these leagues are trying to do in competition.
You're violating the rules of competition in this case.
Yes.
And to the ticket selling, as just an example.
Yeah.
Say you're the Charlotte Hornets organization.
Yeah.
Charlotte is playing a terrible team. Pick a team, doesn't matter. Charlotte's playing a terrible team. You can buy tickets to that game cheaper than you can when LeBron and AD come to town.
Yeah.
But then what happens, and this was a different controversy, but then what happens is because the Lakers know
it's bad.
That it's going to be bad, AD and LeBron sit.
Because they don't need to play.
They don't need to play to win the game.
They can rest. And that makes everybody upset again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you get one chance a year for your 7-year-old who was a fan of LeBron James forever, who was a fan of X player forever. They pay decent money. Like maybe these are blue collar people, and like this is the only NBA game, this is the only professional sports game that we can afford to go play this year. You walk into the arena, LeBron James is sitting on the bench in a suit. Terrible for everyone.
Yeah, except you're going to get better players down the line, right? So it's still the incentive, even though all these other things go. The other issue is that it affects competitive balance in general. Just as a stat here, last year, 2019, in Major League Baseball, was the first year that 4 teams won 100 games. It is no mistake that that is also the first year that there were 4 teams that lost 100 games. Sports is a zero-sum game outside of the NFL where you can tie every once in a while. There are a certain number of games played in a sport, which means there are a certain number of wins and a certain number of losses. If a team is intentionally losing all of its games, they are handing wins to other teams. And so you may see, for instance, in the NBA, the 2 greatest regular seasons were aided not necessarily by tanking, but it illustrates the point. 72-10 Bulls had a 16-win 76ers team in the Eastern Conference and in the Atlantic Division. They played that poor team, I believe, 6 times at that point, the way the schedule worked out. And if that team's better, more mediocre, the Bulls maybe still win, perhaps.
But maybe they don't get a record.
But maybe they don't get 72. Maybe they win 5 of those 6 games instead of 6. The 73-9 Warriors had a 17-win Lakers team. It's Kobe's last season. They had some other injuries. Some players didn't work out. 17-win Lakers team at the bottom. Again, same conference, same division. They play those teams the most. So those records are aided by the fact that teams are losing.
Yep. So that makes an even further division between the best team and the worst team. Mm-hmm. So you're, like you said, they're handing the best teams even more wins.
Yes.
So like in the ACC basketball, this most recent season, NC State was in the year before.
Yeah.
Say the year before, State would have made the tournament.
Yes.
But because they increased their number of conference games,
that
further divided the top 5 or so teams.
Yes.
Any other year, the top 7 or 8 ACC teams are going to get into the tournament.
Yeah.
But they the teams at the bottom created a divide at the top. So like Virginia and State were on the bubble.
Yeah.
State might not have gotten in.
Yeah.
Even though they were probably better than
teams in other conferences.
Who were who made the tournament based on record and whatever else. But because of that division, again, we're not saying ACC basketball teams are tanking.
Yes.
But just to illustrate the point
of the number of
zero-sum games, zero-sum outcomes in these sports. State might not have made the tournament if there was one.
Right.
Which would have been a catastrophe.
Right. All because in the ACC they added 2 games this season for every team, which meant somebody had to lose those. It's more opportunity for L's in your conference. It makes the conference look bad, like you said. So zero-sum. If you have a team tanking, somebody has to win those games, and it makes everything just look worse.
The product's just bad.
Yeah. It also upsets economics. We've mentioned that before, but teams that tank sell less tickets. 100%. We know this to be true.
Yeah, so tanking lowers ticket sales. There is a scholarly gentleman who wrote a law review titled Trust the Process, How the NBA Can Combat Its, quote, tanking, unquote, problem on the court. One of his arguments lies in just that, in attendance rankings per team. Tanking lowers ticket sales and revenue. Okay, so he talks about this, and he highlights a few different teams. He talks about the early 2000s Cleveland Cavaliers. In the 01-02 Cavaliers season, he classifies them as whether or not they were tanking, the average fan attendance for that season, and then the league rank out of the total number of NBA teams. For the 01-02 Cleveland Cavaliers, they were not tanking. Average fan attendance was 14,539. That was 19th out of 29 teams in the league. The next season, 02-03, they were tanking because who was coming?
The king.
LeBron James. LeBron James. He was coming. Hometown kid. They had to catch it. Like that was the big fish. Possibly the biggest fish in NBA draft history. 02-03, they were tanking. Average fan attendance, 11,496. That was 22nd in the league out of 29. So guess what? They draft him. They were not tanking in the 03-04 season. Attendance increased by almost 7,000 fans from the tanking season to LeBron James's rookie season. They went from 22nd out of 29 in fan attendance to 14th in the top half of fan attendance for one player.
So they lost 3,000 fans to gain 7,000, which is a net, of 1,000,
gain.
right? At the end of the day.
Yep.
And so I mean that's, it works out. Again, it's just like the logic for tanking. You're really terrible. Everybody stops paying attention to you for a little while, and then people show back up. And the question is whether or not that outweighs the dip, right? Does the end result, is it Machiavellian, right? Does the end result justify how you get there? Or would it have been better eventually to have 14,000 than 14,000, and then you get better eventually and have 17 or 18,000 show up?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I guarantee the Cleveland Cavaliers, hindsight is 20/20, it's been almost 20 years.
Or 50-50 if you're Cam Newton.
Hindsight's 50-50. And guaranteed it did the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, he saved the franchise.
Sure.
They might have moved.
Yeah.
Like, they were just terrible.
Bad.
Another example, the Supersonics, when they were still in Seattle. 05-06,
R.I.P.
were not tanking. They averaged 16,198 fans. That was 9th out of 30 for the year. 06-07, tanking, 15,955 fans. 12th out of 30. 07-08, tanking, 13,355. That was 20th out of 30. I think they moved.
Then they moved. And they moved in. Yeah, they moved in the middle of that process.
Because that's how they drafted KD.
Got KD first.
Russell
He played a season
Westbrook,
in Seattle and then moved to OKC.
In back-to-back years, they drafted KD, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden.
Yeah, they had their big three piled up, and then they got Serge Ibaka in a draft, and Jeff Green was in a draft.
They were so close.
Then it blew up.
They were so close.
So there certainly is evidence that tanking is good because you get better players. There's certainly evidence that it's good because eventually you'll have more fans, although you may move to get that. But
you may have to switch cities.
But there's also evidence that it's bad. There certainly is a dip that is ugly and unseemly in the process. So that's it for this week. Be sure to tune in 2 weeks when we drop our next episode, and we're going to tell you if this works or not. Hint, yes, and also no. So it's not necessarily a given. We'll tell you more about that in 2 weeks, and we will see you then.
Bye! Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only please, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.
I fell asleep watching an Avengers movie.
Yeah,
Like,
see,
I don't think that's possible.
Mm-mm.
But once I get still, it's over.
That's it.